So, we are now going to move on to Module 7, the Industrial Revolution, and we're going to start talking about mass production and the ways in which this really kind of impacted the world, really. And I feel like it's a very relevant topic because if you're, going and watching this lecture live or even watching this lecture later on, if you're sitting here in desks that are mass-produced, you're wearing clothes that are mass-produced, you're on computers that are mass-produced, you're taking notes on notebooks that were mass-produced with pens and pencils and markers that were mass-produced. You're probably you might be wearing glasses to fix your vision, to help you see. Those glasses have been mass-produced, or contacts that were mass-produced. Everything that we basically have today is mass-produced. There are very few things that we use today that are not part of this mass production of society. Industry is really going to make a change here and grow by leaps and bounds. Even though it has continued to do so moving forward, the very first industrial revolution here is really going to change the world forever. And industry or industrial basically meaning anything to do with industry or manufacturing. And so the revolution is one of those terms, again, that come sometimes as a misnomer because we think, oh, revolution, that means that it's sudden, and that's not necessarily true. The Industrial Revolution is kind of a slow rollout where technologies build upon each other to slowly change the landscape. But when you look at the beginning to the end of it, over a stretch of, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, it's revolutionary in the way it changes everything. And again, it's enormously impactful as almost everything that we use, again, is mass-produced. Bottles of water, everything. And so it's going to change society in hundreds of ways. And we're going to talk and break down a few of those ways over the next couple lectures in this module. But again, the scope is enormous. And another way, you look not just at mass-produced goods, but you have major changes in transportation. You go from the easiest and fastest way to get from A to B is on a horse or horse and carriage. And now, within a very short amount of time, you're going to be using steam locomotives and trains and steamboats. And then you're going to get to combustion engines and cars and obviously transportation, communication, agriculture, textiles. All of this is going to be majorly impacted by the Industrial Revolution. So where does it begin? Well, it begins in Europe, in England specifically. And the question is why? Why in Europe, right? And for a long time, there used to be this sort of, basically racist idea that was used to answer this question. And that was, white people are just superior people. And, Europeans are just better than any other group of people. And they're just smarter, which is categorically false and stupid, right? It is straight, absolutely debunked. There's no truth to that whatsoever. And so I think that is categorically rejected. I do think that there are two potential answers, however. The second one I think is basically certain. But the first one is kind of up in the air, I think. But there is this idea that there is a Protestant work ethic which values being industrious. It values hard work because of the Protestant point of view. And that, I think, can be debated for sure. And you can say, well, that doesn't really have anything to do with it. But it is the one thing that, it kind of does overarch some of these things. And we're not saying, any particular occupation, but that these people saw themselves as doing better work because of God. And so you have the writings of a lot of these people that are writing about, I learned how to do this to bring glory to God. And some of these Protestants, and then the Catholics as well, kind of turn it and say, hey, it's actually the Christian work ethic. And then you start the slippery slope of like, well, who's Christians? Mostly white people. Well, white people are better because God loves us more. And then it became very quickly racist pseudoscience crap. But I do think it is a big factor. There's a lot more Protestants in Europe than anywhere else in the world at the time. And of course, America being the other place. And I think we could say that there might be some cultural religious factors there. But you can't really prove it. It's not a definite one, but I think that it is something that is worth discussing, even if you roll it into the entire idea of Christian work ethic. And taking advantage of what God has given you and doing it to the best of your ability to glorify Him. I think that that's a major factor in pushing people to innovate. The other thing that I would say is more definite for sure is in Europe, you have access to coal and oil. And coal, is probably the biggest thing that you could point to and say that's why the Industrial Revolution happened in England. The ability to mine it and burn it and get energy from it is things that are going to make major changes in manufacturing and transportation, because none of those things are going to work if you don't have energy to fuel them. And energy is a big, big part of our lives today. If there's no power, then we're in trouble. A couple years ago, we had the blizzard, and everybody lost power for like a week, and people lost their minds, right? Power, we have to have it. And that is really one of the things that changes, because they have the access to the coal, and they figure out how to burn it and how to use it, and steam power and for heating and things like that in ways that other people had not quite got. And there's huge deposits of coal in England, and therefore you're going to end up with a lot of this innovation coming out of England. And you might want to write this guy's name down. In 1763, the steam engine was invented by a guy named James Watt. Okay, he's the first to pump water out of the mines and realized that steam engines could replace water-based power in the mills. And he was using water pumps in the mines. And he realized that steam engines could replace that. And so you see the big wheels that spin along on lots of rivers and streams, that's producing and powering the engine. So before, all the factories had to be built on the river. It relied on the river's water current to turn the machines. And he's like, that's stupid. Why don't we just invent something that can do that standalone? And they realize all these engines can do better than the water can, and they immediately start to develop a rotary mechanism tied to the engine, and this is going to convert steam power and this engine power into energy. You're going to burn fossil fuels, and you're going to start using coal and oil and turning that into kinetic energy instead of having to rely on the water. And that's going to basically change the entire game. Locomotives, steamships, engines that power factories using this. And so, basically he is the person who pushes all of this forward and makes a dramatic shift forward. Now, it does create a huge reliance on fossil fuels, which some people would argue is bad. But you know what? Those people are... let them get on a treadmill and power their home by their feet, and then we'll talk about how much they're committed to green energy. Okay? And that's kind of the big overview point, though, that we get coal and oil and natural gas and all of these things within the next 200 years, and we're going to become very reliant on those things. Now, the first industry to experience tremendous growth from the Industrial Revolution was the textile industry. You have the invention of the spinning jenny and the power loom. The industry is responsible for producing clothes and using cotton, and these are going to take off because now clothes from cotton can be made faster and cheaper than ever before. They're going to quickly harness steam power, and these new machines are going to produce untold numbers of goods. And then they're going to produce factories where they hook a bunch of these machines together and can do this at a grand scale never even thought of by humans. And at the end of the day, it's going to culminate in the spinning wheel and what's known as the spinning jenny and the power loom, okay? And this is what you had to do before. You had a single string that was being created at once, took forever. Now we're going to hook an engine to this, and it's just going to spin. You used to have to do it with like your feet. You'd have to sit there and you'd have like a bicycle thing, and you'd literally do like this, and you would sit there and turn the machine. So all day, you just sat there and did this, and made string. Now, you're going to hook it up, and it's just going to do that. And I can hook up 100 of these in a row. Instead of 100 people and have to pay 100 people and go at their speed, I can hook 100 of these up in a row and make everything very, very quickly. This is another example. This is the spinning jenny. You can see the picture looks kind of weird, but this is the general idea of it. And we'll go to the power mule, or the power loom. And this is the one that really matters. It's invented by Edmund Cartwright in the late 1700s. And, you don't have the dates on the slide because depending on the industry, they're going to vary. But we're looking at the late half of the 1700s through the entirety of the 1800s, really, just to kind of give you a broad scale. So Cartwright developed, the first large-scale textile machine that could produce, far more cotton than anybody had ever thought of. He could produce 200 to 300 times as much in a single day that could be done by hand at a factory of the same size. So 300 times more thread. And by 1850, all of Britain is producing 200 times as much cloth as it had in 1770. So you're talking about huge, huge exponential growth in basically less than a century. It's an industry that British basically completely dominates. In turn, the textiles are really one of the linchpin industries of the Industrial Revolution for practical reasons. Raw materials available from South America, like cotton, and really the American South as well, are going to be imported in record numbers. You're talking hundreds of millions of tons of cotton every year going to England to be turned into cloth. And unfortunately, yes, slavery becomes very profitable, and we know about that, but this is in a U.S. history course, so we're going to kind of leave that where it is at the moment, but understand that this growth of the textile industry of England does become one of the major factors that enables slavery to take such a strong hold in the United States. And so England gets very profitable because of the amount of cotton coming in. They produce cloth with these machines, very high quality in vast numbers, much cheaper. And so now everybody can afford more things. And, and so the British cloth is rapidly going to corner the market pretty much everywhere in Europe, getting tons of profit for British industrialists, ultimately soon to be their empire. And the impact of this is economically enormous. Their industry sort of dominates their European rivals, and France initially tries to keep up, but they don't have the production techniques that Britain does, and Britain comes to dominate the globe. Now, funny enough, the United States actually does start to catch up, but that's because the U.S. government actually would send spies to Europe to get jobs in these factories, and have these spies literally by hand draw out the components of these machines and then bring them back to the United States, reverse engineer them, and put them in their own factories. So we had a little corporate espionage going on back then. But Britain, just because of the amount of money that they get out of this, it's beyond comprehension how fast they're able to grow their empire. But you got to have workers also to do these things. And although they come out on top of the economics, they do start, having major problems with industrialization, like child labor and lack of regulation, and the government, basically saying, we're just going to let people do whatever they want to make as much money as they can, and that's not going to be good. And so we get negatives kind of towards the end, but nope. Little kids are going in there and helping unjam these machines with their fingers. Very dangerous work. Sometimes they would unjam the machines and the machines would instantly start working again, and then kids are walking around with no hands because it just ripped their hands off or their fingers off or their arms off, or just, pull them into the machines and kill them. And so there definitely needs to be some regulation, but it's going to take like decades before real regulation is going to happen. The machines become very elaborate, very, very high-end versions of the powered mule loom is this guy, Francis Kevin Lowe, who visits England again. He memorizes the design. He's basically spying on them. He brings it back to the U.S., and he builds, in 1820, the first factory in the United States, and what is known as the Lowell machine. And Lowell, Massachusetts is actually named after him. So this is not Francis Cabot. It's Francis Cabot. I'm struggling to even see straight. Francis Cabot Lowell. So American joins in, and basically they start to catch up to England unlike anybody else because, hey, the cotton's already in America. They don't have to send it across the ocean. They're like, hey, we'll just build the clothes here ourselves. Of course, there in the U.S., we'll also have cotton factories, and they're going to employ tons of women because women had already been working on clothing in the first place, and now they're going to move towards these factories. And because they're moving out of the home where they were working with their hands to build cloth into factories and into the public sphere and into the workforce, this is going to kind of start to spur on the idea of women's rights and push those things forward because now they're going to be a major part of the economic industry. And they're actually going to get terrible wages, but they are going to get paid, and it's very dangerous work, and women are going to find a place in society by doing this. All right, the other area that really transformed is transportation. And while the Industrial Revolution begins with coal and textiles, its effects are probably the most dramatic when it comes to transportation. The first experimental railroad was put to use in 1820, and the first passenger railroads follow in 1830. They go from Manchester to Liverpool, and between these things, they're in northern England. And by the middle of the 1800s, some of the changes, that happen here in these trains, they don't go, maybe but 50 miles an hour, which is far faster than any human had ever gone. Unless a human jumped off like a cliff and then fell to the ground, they might go faster than 50 miles an hour. But that usually didn't end as well as the train ride did, right? And so, again, you have a major change for trade and transportation, the ability to have a bigger, broader network for contact with each other. About 6,500 miles of rail are put down between 1830 and 1850 in England. They built thousands of miles of railroads, and then the rest of Europe soon follows, and then America gets in on the action. And above and beyond their massive economic impact, railroads had a major social and cultural impact as well. You have the British development system of time zones, precisely because, railroads are, you have to know if I leave at this point and travel a certain distance, the sun's going to be in a different place. So we've got to have time schedules so that trains don't run into each other thinking that they're, leaving it an hour apart, or leaving at the same time, but really they're kind of an hour apart, and then they run into each other. And if you look at the system now, where the time zones kind of start, the international time zones and all that, that starts in Greenwich, in London. And because these zones, because rail travel is so prevalent in England. So basically, thanks, England, for time zones. Good job on that. Now, the time zones are very different than they were back then, because now we have airports, and we can really cross the globe and go around. And so we had to continue to really tune those in, but the idea really started because of railroads and trains. You get full-on steam locomotives that could begin carrying people up above 50 miles an hour. Now, in America, we credit a man named Leland Stanford, which Stanford University is named after. And he brings this technology to a competitive level in America. He's a wealthy business tycoon and co-founded the Central Pacific Railroad. And he was, the president of the university, and he was also at one point governor of California. And he makes this undertaking of trying to connect the coast to coast in the United States. And he wants the United States to settle the entire width of the continent, and obviously the United States eventually does. And so he's kind of one of those that brings this about in a big way. So as you can imagine, that's going to greatly affect the makeup of American culture as well. Now, there's one other thing that we talk about in this particular video, and we'll talk about steamboats. It kind of goes hand in hand with the railroads because water has been the most efficient way to transport the bulk of cargo, but, you can only go downriver, right? You need to be able to go upriver so that you can get a boat and go up and down. And so, especially in America where they're sending stuff, from St. Louis to New Orleans down the Mississippi, it's really hard to get back up the Mississippi. In fact, most people that shipped things on the Mississippi before steam power would ship their boats on these cheaply built boats, and then when they got to New Orleans, they'd just scrap them because it was cheaper to scrap it, sell it for parts, bring the money back and buy a new boat than it was to try and get that boat back up the river to send another ship full. And so Robert Fulton is going to develop this steamboat, and he is going to basically change the game. He's going to encourage development of steam power and trade, and it's going to enable long-distance commerce on the rivers. And he develops a ship called the Clermont, which first navigated the Hudson River in 1807, and the first steamboats begin to appear on the Mississippi River in 1811. And this is a picture of the Clermont. Now, there are some growing pains here. The Clermont navigated upstream for about 150 miles and down the Hudson River and up the Hudson River, demonstrated that it could go upstream nearly as fast as it could downstream. But if you look at this, he put the smokestack in the middle of the boat. So the heaviest part of the ship is now in the middle. That's not going to be good. They're going to have to figure that out because if you put the heaviest part in the middle, it's going to snap in half and you're going to die. And so they definitely had some problems with this, especially when you get to the very rough and tumble Mississippi River. And so eventually they're going to, create the engine rooms and move those around. And obviously engine rooms, if it's in the middle also, if it blows up, then you're going to sink also. But this is going to greatly change the way in which travel is done on water. So the advantages are pretty obvious. It reduces the cost of transporting goods. It increases the speed of moving goods and people. You can say, railroads and trains, are going to, and steamboats are going to have as much of an impact on commerce as the factory and steam-powered machines. And trade is going to become more lucrative. And so that is really the main idea of how the very beginnings of the Industrial Revolution started.